animal friends, and welcome to HES Furry Tales. My name is Janine, and this is Trooper. And Trooper is joining us for today's story that's about a very special cat. And you're going to see that Trooper looks like our kitty in the story. So we're excited, and what I have found is cats are great listeners when you read to them. So I have a feeling Trooper and I have been sitting here for a while, and he might jump down and walk around the room, but he likes to explore. So he might explore the room a little bit, but he's a good, sweet kitty, and he's very curious, and he is looking for a forever home. So maybe if you're watching and you're looking for a forever kitty, you guys might be a love match. All right, so before we start our story today, let's talk about a few vocabulary words that are going to be in the story. So one is the word stray. So what does stray mean? When you use the word stray regarding pets, cats, dogs, it means an animal that is homeless or doesn't have a family. So sometimes animals are strays because they've gotten away from their families by accident, out maybe an open door or out through a fence that maybe a gate was left open. And then sometimes there's animals that just don't even have families and they're living outside by themselves. And so that's what a stray is. Another word I want to talk about is adopt. So adopt means bringing a kitty cat or a dog into your family. And when you do that, it's not just bringing them in to live with you, but it is having them, caring for them. So that means providing them food and water and a cozy place to sleep and lots of fun, playtime, enrichment, things like that. So that all goes along with adopting. And I know this little guy here would love to be adopted very soon. And then the last word I want to talk about is curt. So curt is spelled C-U-R-T. And you're going to find in our story that somebody is curt. And what that means is they answer, maybe you give an answer and you're not very friendly about it. And it's a very short answer. So we're going to find our character is curt during the story, and maybe we'll talk about that a little later. So, all right. Well, our story today is called Mrs.Crump's Cat. Kind of looks like Trooper here. So there's going to be some parallels. Trooper is very much like the kitty in our story, so it'll be interesting to read and talk about this little guy too. All right, so this story, Mrs.Crump's Cat, is written by Linda Smith, and the pictures are by David Roberts. So when someone writes a book, they're called an author, and when someone draws the pictures, they are called an illustrator. And you guys could be an author or an illustrator when you grow up, or you know what, you could even do that now. So we'll talk about that at the end of the story too. All right, I think Trooper's going to go explore while I read the story, but I'm quite sure he's still going to listen. Okay, so Mrs. Crump's Cat. Oh, and before I actually start reading, if you are tuning in, I would love it if you say hello in the comments. And if you have any questions, please feel free to ask them. But if you do say hello, tell me where you live and what your name is. I would love to hear that. All right, and my handy-dandy assistant, Mary, is going to keep me up to date with who is tuning in. And we'll probably talk about that at the end, though. Okay, all right. Mrs. Crump's Cat. All right, let me get to the first page. All right, so the first page doesn't have any writing on it, but I want to show you kind of what we're starting with. So it's a house, and it's raining. There's a little yellow cat on the steps, and it looks like somebody in the doorway. Okay, so that's where we're starting. All right. day, Mrs. Crump opened her front door to fetch the paper and discovered an exquisite golden cat shivering on her porch step. "Shoo!" she cried. "Shoo! Go away!" But the cat did not go away. "I'll have you know," Mrs. Crump said, "I have no use for a cat." Mrs. Crump turned away, but somehow the door did not quite shut, and the cat slipped in. "I should have known," Mrs. Crump said. "Cats are sneaky by nature." She wrestled a log into place, then watched as the cat preened and primped and polished itself in front of the fire. "When the cat is dry," Mrs. Crump thought, "I'll send it on its way." But when the cat was dry, it curled itself around Mrs. Crump's ankles like a soft velvet ribbon and mewed hungrily. Mewed is like meowed. Mew, mew, mew. Mrs. Crump went to her pantry and got a slice of bread, but the cat would not go near it. "Just as I suspected," Mrs. Crump said. "Cats are finicky as well." Mrs. Crump decided she would have to go to town, and she threw on her overcoat. "Tonight," she said to the cat, "I will send you on your way." Oops. All right. Mr. Henry nodded his head and said, "Good day," when Mrs. Crump entered the store. "Good day to you," she said curtly, and was a bit surprised she'd said even that. Mrs. Crump paid for a pint of cream and had started on her way when she changed her mind. "What is it? Something else?" the grocer asked. And before she even thought the words, Mrs. Crump found herself asking that a shiny red pet dish be added to her order. "Do you have a new dog?" Mr. Henry asked. "I do not," Mrs. Crump said. "I have a stray cat." "Don't feed it," Mr. Henry warned. "If you do, you'll never be rid of it." It was the strangest thing, Mrs. Crump thought, but somehow the way back home seemed far shorter than the way there. That night, Mrs. Crump filled the shiny red dish with cream and added another log to the fire. Soon the bowl was empty and the cat was full. It was time to put the cat out. Mrs. Crump stood at the door with the cat in her arms. She looked up at the clear, starry sky. She poked her nose out and sniffed the cool, dry air. Mrs. Crump looked down at the cat. The cat looked up and purred magnificently. Look at that. "I smell rain," Mrs. Crump decided, slamming the door shut. It would be foolish to turn out a dry cat only to have a wet one on the porch step again in the morning. "Tomorrow," she said to the cat, "I will send you on your way." There he is. He's by the fire again. The next day was bright and sunny, and Mrs. Crump was a bit disappointed. It was a lovely day to turn the cat out, but it seemed such a shame to waste a half a pint of cream when she had traveled so far to buy it. It will only spoil, Mrs. Crump decided. When the cream is gone, I'll send the cat on its way. Mrs. Crump poured the last of the cream at breakfast. The cat stretched and yawned and circled the bowl, then stopped and scratched. Mrs. Crump parted a bit of its golden fur and saw to her horror a single flea flitting between the cat's ears. I will not have critters of that sort in my home, Mrs. Crump decided, or declared. There's the flea. Did you see the flea? Right there in the middle of his head. Before you go anywhere, she said to the cat, you'll need a good scrubbing with brown soap. A lot of trouble you are, Mrs. Crump said, throwing on her overcoat. She pulled the door shut behind her and headed for town. Hello again, Mr. Henry said as Mrs. Crump entered his store. And hello again to you, she said, but not quite as curtly as before. Mrs. Crump paid for a bar of brown soap and a pint of cream and had started on her way when she changed her mind. What is it? Something else? The grocer asked. And before she could even think the words, Mrs. Crump found herself asking that a dainty yellow collar with a silver bell be added to her order. Little cat collar. I take it you still have the cat, Mr. Henry said. I would have turned that cat out long ago, Mrs. Crump explained, but it's been one thing after another, and now I'm afraid the cat has forgotten its way. Hang a sign in my store, Mr. Henry suggested. If someone claims the cat, your troubles will be over. And if no one claims the cat, Mrs. Crump asked. I'm afraid you'll have no choice but to keep it, Mr. Henry said. It was the strangest thing, but somehow Mrs. Crump had never noticed before what a smart man Mr. Henry was. That evening, after the cat's bath, Mrs. Crump made up a sign, a very small sign. She started to write, found, one exquisite golden cat, inquire within. But she changed her mind. She turned the paper over and thought a bit. I did not find you, she said to the cat. You were on my porch step, after all. She wrote the word found in very small letters. You've been sneaky and finicky and plenty of trouble, Mrs. Crump reminded the cat. And you were not really very exquisite. When you found me, Mrs. Crump decided, you were wet. Mrs. Crump wrote the word wet in very large letters. I could hardly have called you golden, Mrs. Crump said. You looked plain yellow to me. Mrs. Crump wrote yellow next to the word wet. And to be fair, Mrs. Crump thought, I mustn't forget about the fleas. Finally, she set the sign down and stood back to admire her work. It read, found one sneaky, finicky, troublesome, wet yellow cat with fleas. Mrs. Crump was at Mr. Henry's store first thing in the morning. She pinned the sign in a dusty corner, and Mr. Henry promised to let her know the minute someone inquired about the cat. See the sign right there. It's not very big. The very next evening, in fact, Mrs. Crump was back at Mr. Henry's store. Sorry, Mr. Henry said, no one asked about the cat today. A pity, Mrs. Crump said, paying for 6 fat livers and a can of tuna. Mrs. Crump found herself singing on the way home. Finally, at the end of the week, Mr. Henry showed up at Mrs. Crump's door with the dusty sign in his hands. No one had claimed the sneaky, finicky, wet, troublesome, yellow cat with fleas. It was the strangest thing, but somehow Mrs. Crump was not the least bit surprised. as well, Mr. Henry said. You have bought a collar, soap, livers, tuna, 2 full pints of cream, and a shiny red dish. You may as well have a cat to go with them. Now, how could this happen? Mrs. Crump wondered. I had no use for a cat. Cats are clever that way, Mr. Henry said. Before you know it, you'll be sitting by the fire with the cat on your lap, wondering how you ever got along without it. That night, Mrs. Crump put an extra log on the fire and did just that. They look pretty happy, huh? All right. Let's talk about a couple of things in this story. So we're going to look at this picture. Let's see. Look at Mrs. Crump's face. Look at her face there. And Kitty's face too. And then right here. And then let's scooch over to, let's see, when she has had the cat for a couple of days. Look at her face here. And then look at her face at the very end. Gosh, what a difference. She seems a lot happier in the end. I think the kitty cat, having a kitty cat in her life makes her so much happier because she has somebody to love and somebody is loving her. That exquisite golden cat. So I love this story because this kitty cat has brought her so much joy, and you can see it all over her face. And that's what animals do in our lives. They bring us a lot of joy. So anyway, this is a special story, and I hope that our kitty cat Trooper, who's sitting behind our camera watching, I hope that he finds his family soon. But let's talk about real quick, if you were to really find a cat, what would you do? Well, first thing you want to do is see if that kitty cat is wearing a collar and a tag. And if they have a tag, you can call their owner and see if you can get them back home. If they don't have a tag, you could take the kitty to a veterinarian's office or to a shelter, and they can scan them to look for a microchip. Microchips are what a lot of dogs and cats have in the back of their neck, and it allows us to figure out who their family is. So microchips are a wonderful way to identify a kitty cat or a dog, and a shelter or a veterinarian's office can tell you really quickly if a cat has a microchip. Let's see, what else would you do? A good thing to do if you found a kitty is you could put posters up, kind of like Mrs. Crump did, and in different places around your home where you found your kitty. And you would definitely want to check in with a shelter and see if anyone's looking for that kitty cat. If you could take care of it, maybe foster it until the owner was found. And if no owner is found, well, then you might have yourself a brand new family member like Mrs. Crump did. But if you can't, then you can bring them to a shelter and we can take care of them and then help find their family. So I want you to check your pets at the today after this video. Are they wearing an identification tag that has your phone number on it so that if they ever get lost, you can find them? Anybody who finds a pet, if they have a tag, they can just call you and they can get them home right away.
Lost and found sites?
Yes, and if you find a cat or you lose a kitty cat, there are all kinds of lost and found sites on Facebook, as a matter of fact. But what you could do is look for those on Facebook. You can also call a local shelter like us, and we can help you with all the different things you need to do when you're looking for a lost cat or you found a cat. All right, well, I have an activity for everyone. So we talked about at the beginning about being an author and an illustrator. An author writes stories and an illustrator draws pictures. So I would love it if somebody who's watching might, or all of you, might like to write a story about a kitty cat, or maybe a story of your own about a cat's adventures, or draw some pictures, or you can do both. Sometimes we have people who are authors and illustrators. So I would love to see that, and you can send it to us through our Facebook page. All right, Mary, is there anybody who said hello?
Yes, Erin Curley misses you. Bob Citrullo is watching. Zoe Jackson and Emma. Chris May says, you are awesome, but we already knew that. And the stories are great. Laura Williams says that her dog Felony is watching. Bradley shared the stream, and Susan Izell, the crazy cat lady, has been observing too.
Oh, fantastic. Look at Trooper. He's looking for his new family to come find him. Come here. Come here. Hi. So Trooper has been, I don't know if you've seen his tail go by the book, but he's been circling and listening to the story. Yes, he's a sweet boy. Well, as always, thanks everybody for watching and listening, and always be kind to all animals, both wild and domestic, and always, always love your pets.